My senior project is about the experiences of adopted children and their relationship with their adoptive families. I chose this topic because I wanted to share my experiences as an adopted child, and I wanted to share how grateful I am to my adoptive family and how lucky it feels to be blessed to be one of those children who were given another chance to have a family and experience their love and care. In the beginning of my project, my aim was to prove that it is possible for adoptive families to have a life that will not be affected by adoption issues. This means that adoptees won't have to experience the feeling of being different, being incomplete, or being unwelcome. Adoptees won't need to wonder about their biological parents and ask questions like, who are they? What do they look like? Why did they leave me? Did they not want me? And so on. In essence, I wanted to show that adoptive families can have a life like a normal family. I had this urge to tell everyone that adoption is not as bad as how it looks in TV shows or movies. They often depict the adopted child as someone to be pitied or someone out of place in the family or someone in conflict with their family members like their parents, titos, titas. But I want to tell everyone that that's not always true. Because of this, I wanted to help spread a positive image on adoption. In my experience, belonging to an adoptive family works out fine. What I believe the reality is that most adoptive families are very welcoming and are really very accepting. They go out of their way to relate with the adopted child to make him feel that he really belongs. To be able to prove my point, I wanted to know the experiences of other adoptees and what issues are they facing now. I wanted to understand what makes adoptive families a successful one and an unsuccessful one, so that when I share this information with other adoptees, it will help them find their way to have a good and successful adoptive family or adoptive life. I began my research using the internet, but I had a hard time because the results that came out are usually about requirements for adoption or how to adopt or the technical stuff about adoption, and that's not what I needed. So I planned on scheduling interviews to get the information I needed, but it was difficult for me to convince myself to start interviewing people because I realized that I'm shy. when it comes to picking people, and I also thought that it was a very sensitive topic, so I didn't want things to get too personal. I was only able to interview one person who was a social worker, and she gave me a few facts and statistics about adoption, like number of children available for adoption, ways of promoting adoption, and what are the problems affecting the adoption program. So instead of having interviews, I sent out questionnaires, and 5 adoptees responded to it. The questionnaire had 15 questions. Some of these were, what age were you adopted? When were you told that you were adopted? How did you react to it, etc. The questionnaire was meant for them to share about their experiences as an adopted child and what they think or feel about their adoptive family and what difficulties are they going through. I also sent out questionnaires to adoptive parents, and I asked questions like, what are your reasons for adopting, and how is your relationship with the child? I also read parts of a book entitled Being Adopted, A Lifelong Search for Self. It was written by 3 psychologists named David Rodzinski, Marshall Schechter, and Robin Keene. The book is about the development of an adopted child from infancy to adulthood. It explains what adoptees think and feel at certain phases of their lives. I read the part of the book which was about the adoptees as an infant and adoptees as teenagers. The first time I read it, I found it hard to agree with what the book was saying because it contradicted my experiences as an adopted child. After a while of contemplating on my project, I had second thoughts about my point. I tried to prove that adoptees won't have to be affected by adoption issues, which I realized was not realistic or not true. So then, the focus of my project revolved around these questions. What are the adoptees experiencing? Do I have similar experiences with them? And is it alright if I am experiencing the same thing? These questions became the focus of my project instead. As I researched about my project, I discovered that there are three types of adoptive families. From the Center for Adoption Support and Education, the three types of adoptive families are the blind, the blaming, and the balanced. Blind adoptive families are those who cannot accept the differences they have between the child and the family. Families like these will try to cover things up to make it appear that the child is biologically theirs. Blaming adoptive families blames adoption for every problem that comes up in their family. And this happens often when adoptive children can't live up to the expectations of their parents. Balanced adoptive families are able to acknowledge the differences they have and are able to talk about adoption comfortably. Learning about this gives me a picture of how other adoptive families work or functions. I believe that it is important to know about these three types of adoptive families because they create an effect to the adopted child. Depending on the experiences of the adoptee, anything could have initiated the difficulties that they're going through. So what are the struggles of an adopted child? The struggles of an adopted child are somehow part of their loss and grief. Unlike death or divorce, loss and grief is quite different for adopted children. When a child has created attachments with their first caretakers or their biological parents, there will be a sense of loss for the adopted child. As for the children who are adopted as an infant, there's still somehow a sense of loss for the child. For example, a loss of sense of origin. This feeling of loss may be experienced in different ways, like the stability of their relationship with their adoptive families, or a more common experience is when a child loses his sense of self. Grief, on the other hand, is what the child feels when he has experienced that sense of loss. The following are examples of what adoptees go through when they are grieving. So the names that I will mention are not their real names. The first example is feeling incomplete. Some adoptees feel that they are incomplete. From the book Being Adopted, The Lifelong Search for Self, a girl named Sarah, a 17-year-old, was longing for her biological family. She said, "I need to know more. Why did it happen? What was she like? Who is my birth father? What is he like?" The older I get, the more important it is to know. It's pretty frustrating being an adoptee sometimes. So Sarah's situation is commonly experienced by most adoptees. The next example is when adoptees question about their biological parents or wonder about the possibilities. In my questionnaire, some of the adoptees have the same questions as Sarah's. Like George, 19 years old, was adopted as an infant. His kind of adoption is called relative adoption, which means that his biological parents and his adoptive parents are related to each other. He said, "I just wanted to know who my biological dad was. I always knew my biological mother's side because my dad is cousins with her. I kept in touch with her. His biological father was murdered. All he can do now is look for any record of his father's identity. This is a great deal of loss for adopted children, but it seems that George has coped well, and it is probably because of his personality and his relationship with his adoptive parents that made him cope well with his situation. 18-year-old Arlene was also adopted as an infant. She is well adjusted with her family and they have a good relationship with each other. She said, I think the main question that bothered me as a child was, why did my biological parents give me away? I found out that sometimes, even though you have the most amazing adoptive parents, you can't take away the fact that you are adopted. You can't help but be curious sometimes. I asked the adoptees to describe how it feels like to be an adopted child. Arlene replied, sometimes I do wonder how different I would be if I wasn't adopted, and I often wonder how I'd look like if I had my adoptive parents' genes. But besides that, I don't feel any different from anyone else. George also had the same insight. He said, I didn't feel any different. I sometimes questioned how I would have turned out if I was the biological son of my parents. But really, I don't feel bad or anything. As we grow older, we tend to go on in a journey of finding ourselves. Wondering about the possibilities of what could have been is part of the search for self. Everyone goes through that stage, but what also complicates the search for self or the adoptees is that it involves looking back, comparing ourselves with our parents, and at the same time trying to discover our origins or our ancestors. This process is complicated for adoptees because the information about our past is usually lost or hidden. This leaves a huge gap on a period of our lives that remains unknown. Another example is feeling different. Having said this, I find that having identity issues affects the self-esteem of some adoptees. Adoptees can feel either out of place, unwelcome, or indifferent. In my questionnaire, I asked the adoptees if they felt ashamed for being adopted. Michelle, 16 years old, used to feel different among her peers. She said, when I was in an all-girl exclusive school, I was a little ashamed and afraid. All-girls schools tend to be very judgmental and mean. But when I moved to an IS co-ed school, everyone was very accepting and considered adoption not unusual at all. I fit in very well and felt very comfortable and lost all shame or fear of admitting I was adopted. Also, she used to be conscious of her skin color because she had dark, tan complexion, while her adopted family had fair skin and mestizo features. She used to feel different since her cousins used to tease her. Arlene had a similar experience. She said, I wasn't really bullied, but I do remember one time when our cousin's maid said that I came from the trash can, which really hurt me when I was younger. My cousins would also compare my skin color with theirs and would tease me about it. So I guess I was never really teased for being adopted, but rather for being different. I believe that being different can happen two ways. One caused by the people around you, and the other can be caused by yourself. I asked the adoptees how the relationship with their adoptive family is doing. Arlene answered, it's very good. It was never a problem for them. They never made a big deal about it, so I never felt excluded. Growing up, I was a little insecure about being adopted, but my relatives never made me feel that way. It was something I made myself feel. After learning about the emotional struggles of an adopted child, there are adoptees who are naturally resilient in dealing with adoption issues. They are called resilient children. These resilient children are able to handle stressors better compared to the rest of the adoptees. Dr. Budzinski describes them in the book Being Adopted, The Lifelong Search for Self. They are calm, reflective, able to control their behavior and emotions. What makes a child resilient are his coping strategies, coupled with a fundamentally positive self-image and availability for emotional supports. I believe that everyone who answered my questionnaire are resilient children. The way they see their adoption status is very positive. Some of them may be yearning, feeling insecure or out of place inside, but they are looking for ways to cope with this and move on. An example of an adopted child who perceives their adoption status in a very positive way is Arlene. I asked if she wishes to see her biological parents, and she answered, I never really asked about my biological parents. It's not that I don't care, but I don't mind never meeting them. I'm happy with my adopted parents, and I couldn't ask for a better family. If I do meet my biological parents, then cool. But I don't think that I will ever look for them. Most of the adoptees who responded to my survey are from the Waldorf community. Based on the response they gave me in my questionnaire, it shows that they are really supported by the people around them. Amy, 19, is another example of a resilient child. She can reflect on her own situation and is able to acknowledge her difficulties. In my questionnaire, she described how she feels to be an adopted child. She said, I do not think I'm special, nor do I think I'm inferior. What I am is good enough, and what I know is that this is my real family, blood related or not. I wasn't abused emotionally or physically because I was adopted. To tell you the truth, I think they love me more because I was adopted. This insight shows how strong Amy is as an adopted child. Every adoptee has their own way of coping with their situation. It seems that the way adoptees cope with their adoption issues depends on how his parents educated him about it and how much he understands it and how his relationship is with his friends. In the beginning of my project, I was blind to the reality of what being adopted is really like. I thought that there was a right or correct way of living as an adopted child. I thought that not getting affected by adoption issues and not feeling any of these struggles defined what a successful adopted family is. I felt my life was on the right track. I thought that it was good that I was not experiencing any of these struggles. Having that belief in mind, I was so driven to tell everyone that it's possible to have that kind of life because I have that kind of life. I then became curious if my experiences were the same with the others, and if it wasn't, how is it different? After receiving the answers in my survey, I began to see that in some way, adopted children are actually still affected by adoption issues. In my situation, I knew I was experiencing some kind of struggle, but I didn't think it had anything to do with my being adopted. As I was working on my project, I was slowly recognizing that I was also affected by these adoption issues. All this time I was thinking that I was perfectly fine because I have adjusted myself with my family. But I realized that in my effort to adjust, I have masked my true self. I did this so that I may conform or blend in. This was my way of coping. My family has always been considerate, caring, sincere, and loving. They have always been pleasant towards me. However, there are few moments in my life where I feel the need to do something in order to fit in. My family hasn't done anything to make me feel that way. I realized that my feeling was my own doing. I allowed myself to feel that way. I realized that I have been experiencing difficulties, and yet I was able to find ways to cope. That makes me fall under the category of a resilient child. And then I asked myself, am I resilient because I am adopted, or is resiliency really just the way I am? At the very least, I believe that my experiences, whether in relation to my adoptive family or not, has helped mold me to become the resilient person I am. In the end, I have realized that as adopted children, we can't help but go back to the fact that we are adopted at one point in our life. To associate our problems with being adopted is natural. To experience grief and loss as an adopted child is normal. But it doesn't mean that having these struggles makes adopted family unsuccessful. I've come to the realization that every family has their own challenges. There will always be challenges, but there are also many gifts and many blessings that come along with adoption, and I truly appreciate that. I am very grateful for having a family that is thoughtful, loving, caring. Also, I was never abused, rejected, or looked down on. I feel their love. They have always welcomed me as part of their family. There are rough times, but I'm hopeful that with my mom and the love of my whole family, we will be able to weather the challenges we face. In ending, people say that before we were born, before we were even in our mother's womb, we chose the people we wish to meet here on earth. I haven't quite figured out yet why I'm here with my adopted family. Why are we together? I hope to find out one day. But meanwhile, what I do know in my heart is that with them is where I belong. Before I show my artistic presentation, I would like to make a few acknowledgements.